Today we're going to build a pillowy soft leather backrest cushion for an antique Gus Stickley rocker. Stick around, we'll jump into it. Well, I'm always saying it, with arts and crafts furniture, mock-up is everything. So luckily we have the ability to go in the house and grab some Morris chair cushions and see how each one fits and try it on for size, see what we think. This cushion, for instance, is 26 inches high. It completely hides the nice decorative rail on the backrest here, and it actually sits a little bit high too. It's nice if the cushion kind of hits you, so it encourages that slight extension at the neck as you kind of ease into a comfortable position. So we're going to experiment with one that's a little bit shorter than this. So here's a ready-made cushion from a Morris chair, and we'll see how this one fits. I think looks-wise, this may be just a little bit too low, but we can compromise and make it about an inch higher than this one for the new cushion. So that last cushion was a 24-inch tall foam, plus the batting and leather and piping, etc. And the first cushion we saw was a 26-inch foam. So we're going to fall right in the middle. We'll make our block of foam 25 inches tall, and I think that'll work out quite well. As far as the width of the backrest foam, you more or less want to cut it the available space between the armrests. We're showing about 20 inches here. Maybe I'll just make it a 1/4 inch undersized. And that's just so by the time you get the batting and the piping and the leather, that's the amount of material that we'll have to kind of pinch in between this area to keep the backrest cushion in place. That's particularly important if you don't have straps on your backrest cushion. For this chair, we are planning to make straps on the backrest, so it's not as critical, but I still like to have a little bit of a friction fit of the cushion between the armrests. It's important so that when you get out of the rocker, the backrest cushion stays in place. Okay, so just using a T-square and a Sharpie marker, just go ahead and mark out the size of your foam. In this case, we are 25 inches tall by 19 3/4 wide. If you have a medium dense foam, you might want to cut it at the bandsaw or with a double blade electric turkey knife, but this really soft 1818 foam, even in a 2-inch thickness, cuts really well with upholstery shears. So our overall cushion thickness is going to be 3 inches. So we'll cut out a piece of 1-inch foam, mark that and square it up, and we'll add that to the main 2-inch piece. There's probably several products that'll work, but I've taken a liking to this 3M Super 77 spray glue. It's got a real high tack and you don't have to wait for it, so it's great for foam. Give both surfaces a light coating, especially around the edges, and we'll bring those panels together. Nice thing about this particular spray glue is if you do get it set in the wrong spot, you do have a minute just to quickly reposition that. Once you get it where you like it, just give it a firm press, and that's got a bond to stay. So if you wind up with a thicker piece on one side than the other, make the thicker piece where the sitter will put their back into the rocking chair. This is just a little bit softer because there's 2 inches here before any glue. If you have 3 1-inch layers glued together, it certainly doesn't matter, but if you have a thicker piece, definitely present that side towards the sitter. Okay? Now, it's true probably with any cushion, but particularly with arts and crafts style cushions, you don't want it to be a real blocky piece of foam. So just take some shears, knock the edges off, start giving it that little rounded, natural effect that we want. Next, you'll wrap the foam with high loft Dacron. Usually it's about 3/4 of an inch thick, uncompressed. And you can get that first layer on and decide if you want a little extra loft, a little extra fluff to the cushion. In that case, you can add a second layer of Dacron. Wrap your first layer of batting side to side around the cushion and cut it so that the trimmed edges will be able to fold over and cover the end of the cushion. At the corners, just cut a shallow V into your batting on both the top and bottom, and that'll just help you close up the corners a little better. Same spray glue on the batting, but you can go a little bit light. The batting doesn't need much glue to hold it in place. Now here I've decided to do a second layer of batting. If you do want to do a second layer of batting, just cut right along the edge of the cushion and plan to just wrap it over the front, top, and back, but nothing on the sides. You'll just fold it up this way for a nice rounded effect on the top of the cushion. So this is what the cushion looks like with the second layer of polyester batting. And what you need to do now is take measurements. You want to take measurements right over the batting to get true dimensions for your leather panels. So we're wrapped around the long length of the cushion here, and as we compress the batting slightly, we get a measurement of 60 inches. It's always helpful to make yourself a sketch. Remember what the dimensions will be. Now this is the long dimension that we're talking about here. Around the perimeter of the cushion again was 60 inches. Divide 60 by 2, you get 30. Plus a ½ inch seam allowance on either side brings you to 31. But I'm also going to make the tail of this cushion just 3/8 of an inch longer on the bottom side to account for a top stitching on the zipper that I'll do. So our finished dimension here will be 31 3/8. Now we need to get a measurement around the width of the cushion. With a little light compression of the batting, we get a total circumference on the width of 49 inches. Divide that by 2, we get a number of 24.5 inches. Add to that a ½ inch seam allowance on either side for an actual panel width of 25.5 inches. Okay, so we've added in our 25.5 inch width for our actual leather panels. Let's talk about notches. For a cushion that's about 3 inches deep plus 2 layers of batting, you'll need the corner notches to be about 1 3/4 inches square at the top. Now at the bottom, since I've decided to do a top stitch zipper, that will eat up a little bit material at the bottom. Therefore, I need this side of the notch to be the regular 1 3/4 inches, but the up and down, I need a little longer tail here, so I'll make this dimension 2 1/8. Now another nice detail you can add is a little piece of dust fabric on the bottom of your cushion, and this will just make it so that the Dacron won't get caught up in your zipper. And it's also nice to have the grommets punched for venting the leather and look up and just see a black fabric behind there. It's a little more professional looking than seeing the white Dacron. So this is optional, but if you don't decide to make a slip cover for your cushion, just glue on a little bit of a dust cover. Regarding the piping strips, you need about 80 inches overall. Unless you have a really enormous hide, you're not going to be able to get an 80-inch strip in a continuous piece. We've got about 60 inches here from our main piece, and we've got about 40 inches here, so I know that I could make it in 2 pieces if I want to, but what I usually elect to do is take that shorter piece and just cut it in half. That'll give me 3 pieces. The thought process being the seams to these piping joints, instead of being up at the top, you'll have 2 seams down low where they're not very visible, usually down below the armrests of a rocking chair. Now I think we're ready to make up the straps for the backrest cushion. We've got our pieces cut out 2 3/4 wide by 10 inches long. It really helps if you can thin the leather pieces that you're going to use to make your cushion straps. Now, I don't have a bell skiver in my shop where you could just nicely and evenly thin the edges only, but I've come up with a solution that works pretty good in my shop. I just use an oscillating belt sander to thin the entire strip so that by the time you fold it over on itself 2 times, the strap isn't too bulky. And to make up the straps, we'll actually use traditional contact cement. Works really well for flattening out and securing leather to itself. So we'll flip our strips over and go ahead and apply some of this contact cement to the suede side. Needs to be a thin, even coat, and then we'll let that dry for 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll come back and press the strips together and even hammer them down to flatten the seams. So once the contact adhesive has had a chance to tack over a little bit, you can just turn the edges in on themselves. I like to leave about a 1/4 inch of space between the edges here as I start to form the strap, and as you get a couple inches in, just go ahead and hammer your edges flat. Then you just fold the strap on itself again and work the edges a little further with the hammer. Once you have a pair like that, we'll take them up to the sewing machine and sew the edges together. Okay, we'll just finish up our straps by stitching down the seam here to permanently close it up. A little bit longer stitch length is nice for something like this because it shows, and so it can be a longer decorative stitch length. Nice thing about the walking foot is that you really don't have to pull the material through. Walking foot and the feed dogs just kind of work together to do the job for you. Okay, at this point you should have 2 short strips for piping and 1 long strip. What you'll do is sew the 2 short strips to either end of the long one. Quick blind seam to knock those together. I'll spool some 5/32 cording off. Conveniently got stored under my sewing table. Alright, we're going to sew up some cording here. Hold your threads back until you get a couple stitches in. Now when I'm sewing up cording, I'm always using a zipper foot. And I've realized a lot of people don't do it that way, but there is a method to the madness. The zipper foot puts the row of stitches fairly close to the cording, but not nearly as close as a 1/4 inch cording foot. And so the reasoning is put a zipper foot on to sew up your cording and then switch back over to the 1/4 inch piping foot to sew the main perimeter of the seam, and that way your row of stitches won't be right on top of each other. Should maximize strength of the leather and the resulting seam. Always check your stitching as you go, make sure you don't have any loose loops on the bottom. Now as you come up to the joint in the piping, make sure to fold the seam allowance open, close that up, and just sew right over it. So you'll wind up with these 2 little inconspicuous seams that you can hide down low on the cushion, down below the armrest somewhere. Once you get those sewn up, you'll be ready to put the main project together. So we've got our notches cut and we're ready to install zipper tape on the bottom edge of both of these main panels for the backrest cushion. Roughly mark the length of the zipper you need and just cut the zipper tape to length. And from there, just turn the zipper show side down, and we'll just go ahead and stitch that to the bottom edge of our main panel. Okay, so now we're at least blind stitched, and the next step is just to separate the zipper tape, and we'll peel that off and attach it in the same way to the other panel. So far we've been using a zipper foot with the needle on the left. Now we're going to switch to a zipper foot with the needle on the right to top stitch that zipper. So our zipper tape is already firmly anchored once, but we're just going to flip it over so we can do that decorative top stitch. Get 2 or 3 stitches in, we'll go ahead and back tack like normal. Okay, so we're using these YKK 4.5 coil zipper pulls, and just feed one onto the open end and you should be able to bring your zippers back together to test the fit. Just make sure that you're aligned at the edge and run your zipper down. Make sure you don't have any spots where it hangs up on the leather or the top stitching. Looks like we did all right. So here's where it starts to make sense why the bottom leg of this notch was a little bit longer at 2 1/8 inch, and this side to side leg of the notch was 1 3/4, because after we top stitch, those edges will just align perfectly. We'll go ahead and sew down the seam line to button up those notches. Make sure to back tack real good. And if you had a longer stitch length for decorative reasons on the top stitching the zipper, make sure to decrease that slightly for these next steps. Closing up these corner notches, you want, more like 8 or 10 stitches per inch. Once you have that short little seam made, it's also nice to trim away this portion of the seam allowance right up to the tip there. You can even just open that up with your scissors slightly. Doesn't matter so much on the bottom here, but when we get to the top, that technique is really important to help the corners sit right. When you cut it away, you'll have this little Star Trek emblem. And when you flip the corner seam inside out, it should look something like that. It doesn't much matter what presser foot you have on to close up these corner notches. I still have my right zipper foot on from top stitching the zipper. We'll keep that on for another minute. We'll eventually have to switch over to a 1/4 inch piping foot to sew the perimeter seam. And the top corners are just square 1 3/4 inches, so they're pretty straight away to sew up. Collect 4 of these, you get to join the Starfleet Academy. Welcome to Starfleet. Okay, now you'll need to assign one of the panels a front and one a back. Locate your piping strip that we made in an earlier step and use the center marks on both the front panel and the piping strip to align things to get started. And we'll actually just staple those parts together with a plier stapler. At this point we're going through 3 layers of thickness, so we're actually going to use a heavy duty plier stapler with 3/8 inch staples. We'll work our way all the way down until this piping is completely attached to the front panel. So when the piping crosses a seam, just go ahead and fold the seam allowance back and try to get a staple on either side. Okay, when the seam allowance is laid open like that, you'll be in good shape. So as we get down towards the bottom on the side of the cushion, we can see where our piping will land, and it's almost down by the zipper. So this will be down below the armrest in our case on this rocking chair, well out of view, so it's a nice place to conceal it by making those 3 pieces of piping rather than just 2. Try to keep the staple off the seam line. You could potentially break a needle if you hit a staple, so just keep it off in the seam allowance and you'll be doing good. Where the piping bends around the corner, you can cut little nicks in it if you like. Sometimes it just lets the piping lay a little smoother as it goes around the corner. So we've got our custom made straps, and it takes a little bit to convince yourself that they ought to be pointed downward and inward like this, but this is the way you'll orient the strap. Now remember, this is the front panel, and the way the strap should look, you should see the seam, the open edge on your strap, and orient them this way as you go ahead and staple them just to either side of this seam. And just make sure you're clear of the seam allowance there to avoid any excess bulk. Get a couple 3/8 inch staples in those straps to hold them in place as we sew them. And the cool thing is, if you're not sure you have the strap orientation right, just flip it out like this. That'll give you an idea of your finished look on the chair. And then go ahead and put the back and the front panels together inside out and just look for your center marks. Align your center marks at the top and go ahead and staple things together that way. Tuck your straps in at the corner, and another key point of alignment is this corner seam. So open up your seam allowance and make sure to staple those seam allowances back to back. If you're having any trouble aligning the edges to get things stapled, you might just try regular sewing clips, and you can work a little quicker to get things stapled up. Now just a reminder here, we haven't actually sewn anything together. The only thing we've actually sewn with thread is to encase the 5/32 piping. We didn't sew the piping to the front panel, that was stapled, and we didn't sew the panels together yet, that's stapled, so we're only going to basically have one perimeter seam. Well, we've been sewing for a while now, so maybe pop in a fresh bobbin. It's always nice if you can avoid running out of bobbin thread when sewing with leather. And we're going to switch over real quick to a 1/4 inch piping foot. So we'll slip the assembly under the 1/4 inch piping foot, and actually we're going to start right up at the top of the cushion in the middle. We'll back tack a few times here and start our next seam going the other direction down the other side. Get a good back tack in before we start sewing down one side of the cushion. Your fingers are a great gauge to make sure you're in the right spot so that that welting cord enters the little tunnel on the bottom side of your piping foot. For the most part, the foot will follow the cording just like a train on a track, but you do want to make sure that you don't inadvertently sew in an extra layer somewhere. As you approach the corner, double check that your seams are aligned front and back. This is the thickest part of the sewing project because we're going over the straps now. And we've also got up to 8 layers as we cross this corner seam, so definitely make sure that your sewing machine is adjusted for maximum walking foot steppage. If you're going to break a needle on your machine, this is probably where it'll happen, but don't stress too much. You can start and stop anywhere along the line, pop a new needle in, and just back tack where you left off and you'll be fine. One more side of the strap to come over. There we go. I think we're down off the mountain now. Now here I know we're approaching the butt joint, the seam in the piping itself, and so we'll take it a little easy as we cross that joint. For my machine, it's really not the increased thickness that would ever give it a trouble. It's just simply if you hit a staple, that could cause you to break a needle. Luckily, it looks like my staples are all out in the seam allowance where they should be, so we'll carry on. Looks like we're over the joint now and no problems. Now at this point, you want to make sure that your zipper is at least partway open. And we'll just see if we can sew right off the end of the piping. Then flip the cushion over and start at the top again so you can sew down the other side of the cushion. We'll hold those threads back for a few and get a good back tack in as we kind of march over our previous seam line there for a few stitches. And we're on our way again. One of the best things about starting with a zipper foot when you're putting together your cording is that by the time we sew this up and turn it right side out, you won't see any visible stitches in the finished seam. And that's a real improvement I noticed when I stopped using this cording foot to make the actual cording. Give it a try yourself. Switch over to a zipper foot to make the cording, and don't use the cording foot until you sew the full perimeter of the cushion. Take a quick glance that your seams are aligned at the corner. We're coming up to one of our challenging spots again. Coming up over the corner straps and the extra layers of these corner joints. So just take your machine nice and slow heading into the corner, because if any part of the project will challenge your machine, this will be it. Always watch the forward momentum of the machine. If you're advancing each time you stitch, you're doing pretty good. But if it stalls out and the needle is kind of stabbing in the same place for a few stitches, it might need a little help. Looks like we're doing pretty good with this triple feed walking foot machine. Of course, it probably doesn't hurt that we have a speed reducer and servo motor installed. Please go ahead and pull all your staples. And if you think about it, run some reinforcement stitches right across the strap out in the seam allowance area. Well, the backrest cover's done. Looks a tad loose without the cushion in there. So we're going to set a few brass grommets into this backrest cover just behind the zipper tape so it won't be visible. Net effect looks kind of like that. If you want to see more on this process, you guessed it, check the description box for that video. We'll briefly show how to stuff the cushion with a garbage bag and a shop vac. If this is a technique you'd like to learn more about, check the description box for my video link.
Okay, there's the specs and rundown on how to make your own leather backrest cushion for an antique rocking chair. Now, if you happen to have a Morris chair, don't worry, the techniques are just the same. Also, look for my series on how to upholster this seat cushion and the wood repair we did on this Stickley 319. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.